And then I finally, not delicately, basically said, somebody better, you know what, say something or I'm going to lose it. And the nurse was like, do you know you're having twins? And like, I went insane.
We are Moms Unhinged, a nationally touring stand-up comedy show. Join us in our podcast as we explore everything from motherhood, midlife crisis, marriage, divorce, online dating, menopause, and other things that irritate us. Awesome. We're so excited to have you on the show, Lisa.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much. Thanks for making space for storytellers. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I really think, like that, a lot of times comedians, that's what we're doing too. We're telling a story.
Absolutely.
We're kind of sharing our experience of life, and we might inflate the truth a little bit, but
True-ish is what we like to call it.
Based in reality.
Someone's idea of reality, or someone my mother used to love to say to me, I don't remember it like that. I'm like, well, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Just because,
yeah.
Right. So memory and all of that comes into play as well.
Exactly. It is funny sometimes when I compare notes with my sister I'm like, what? No, I totally didn't. That's so funny. Yeah. Yes, our experiences are all in our mind, right? So I want to just, we were talking a little bit before the show and talking about your experience of motherhood and how you had children later in life, but 3 children by the time you were 43. At 43, yeah, that's when it all happened.
Well, the hilarious thing is that when I first met my husband, I said, I'm never getting married. And I never want children. And then that changed at some point, right, in my mid-30s. And then it took a while. And first child was born about 3 weeks shy of being 41. And despite being on the mini pill and nursing her, hello, we got pregnant with twins.
Twins. So you were not even then doing in vitro at that point or anything.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Wow.
And the process of finding out about having twins was amazing. Because I was over 40, obviously I was getting an amnio and went into the doctor's office and, they get you up on the screen because back in those days they would throw in a VHS. You'd get to take home the moment, the blessed moment. So the tape is rolling, so they say, and my husband for support is holding my hands over my head because I'm a weenie. I don't like needles. And all of a sudden we see this squiggle on the screen and I'm like, why is there a squiggle on the screen? I don't remember a squiggle the last time I had this. And then, those magnetic things that you push your hands into? Right. And you see the imprint of your hand. It was like that, but with heads this way and this way. And my husband's nice, loving handhold was turning into like a death grip. And the room went completely silent. And then I finally, not delicately, basically said, somebody better, say something or I'm going to lose it. And the nurse was like, do you know you're having twins? And I went insane. I talk about swearing like a sailor. It was, I went crazy and my husband completely silent.
Oh my gosh.
And, they said, cut, let's take a break. And in that moment, we found out not only were we having twins, I was 3 weeks more pregnant. And because twins, only 37 weeks. So in a split second, I lost 6 weeks of the pregnancy.
Wow.
And so it was, didn't know the twins run on the family. I called my mother and she was like, oh, no, they don't run on the family. Called my oldest brother who, after he stopped laughing because I was the last one to get married and the last one to have kids, right? He's like, see? And he told me that, in fact, twins did run in our family. So, you know what? Unexpected, but the greatest blessing in the world. I mean, they're amazing human beings. They're 24 years old now, identical, all girls, 3 girls.
Wow.
Or as we like to say that they were triplets separated by 2 years because they were so close,
Yeah, right. 2 years apart. That is close. Yeah. And wow, what I can't imagine that kind of shock I
Oh my
just
gosh.
can't imagine it.
It was,
Oh,
I think we're still recovering, to tell you the truth. I mean, I know my husband is. I mean, we drove home from Denver. We did not say a word. It was
oh,
just like the look on our face. We were like, because I thought I had the flu. I mean, I was nursing and I was on the mini pill. I
right.
didn't even imagine that I could be pregnant. And,
Yeah.
as it turns out, well, yeah. So,
Wow.
it was total chaos. I can't even, from the moment they came home and trying to, nursing three children with two breasts.
Y-
And
yes, you were. Oh my gosh. Ah, wow.
and just going to the market with the three of them, everything was so much work.
Oh,
We just called it being in the trenches. It was like 18 years of being in the trenches,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
but beautiful trenches because they're incredible human beings. But
Right.
it was quite the ride.
Yeah, and they're probably learning things like really not that far apart. Your potty training almost, like I mean all of that,
Yeah.
it's because that's a
Yes.
whole process, like
It is.
everything.
And then, weaning three children, it was just like, it wasn't an easy process, but I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to another family event with my dress over my head for the entire thing. We're
Yeah.
done. We're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
So,
my gosh. That is incredible. That is incredible. Now,
yeah.
what did you feel like? Did you feel like you were better prepared having them later in life? Having them, did you feel like there was any resilience you had, or what were some of the lessons you took away from that?
Well, I mean, I lived a whole life before we had our kids. So I
Right.
didn't, like I knew myself really well. I knew
Uh-huh.
myself as a human being. I knew myself as a creative person. I was in the performing arts to begin with, and then I moved over to writing. I felt like I had a certain level of self-knowledge that
Hmm.
I hope, who knows? Because I don't know any different. I mean, I
Right.
know there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of stress, there was a lot of exhaustion. My
Mm.
husband and I are both kind of in the creative industries, and so supporting a family of three, we had like 25 jobs between the two of us. Like for the first and like just trying to put kids into, there was no way that we could have them in daycare
Yeah.
because it would cost both of our salaries. It was
Right.
ridiculous. So I worked from home, and they like I have one great memory. So I was doing a lot of freelance publicity and marketing, and I was having a conference call with a film studio because I worked on a number of independent films. And I said to the girls, like, okay, look, mama's gonna be on the phone, and I'm gonna put the timer on for these many minutes. Like, I'm gonna close the door, and you need to be completely quiet. And you need to, like, there are some snacks. You can watch a
Yeah.
show and
Yeah.
completely quiet. So I get on the call. It's all professional. I'm feeling like I got this. And I turn around and I look under the door jamb, and there are three sets of toes under the door jamb, literally wiggling with anticipation, waiting for me to be done.
Oh my
And I had to
gosh.
hold it together because it was so hilarious. It
That,
was just so real. I'll tell you
yeah.
something. That's the thing about being a parent. It's real. You
Yeah.
can't hide from the realness of it, you
Right.
know?
That's right. I know. And you can't anticipate. You can't understand
Yeah.
even the crazy things that can happen. You're like, what? What is what? And if someone would have said this might happen, you'd be like,
You
that's
know, just uh,
ridiculous.
just trying to get all three of them dressed and out the door, and
Yeah.
we'd show up and people would be like, "Oh, it's so great you let your kids dress themselves." And I'd be like, no, actually.
That was me.
Right, right. Or keeping socks, like the twins refused to wear socks no matter how cold it was. They would never ever ever wear
Yeah.
socks when they were little,
Right.
and yeah. So all of
That,
those challenges, but and that's part of the journey for me as a creative person and as a writer
yeah.
and storyteller, is that after the twins were born, my mother-in-law, amazing woman, amazing writer, her blessed be her memory. said to me, "You have to write all this down because you think you're going to remember it, but you're going to be too exhausted and your brain changes. So when, Jack's at work, you have to, you got all this, when you get up to bed, just sit down at the computer and start writing it all down." And I listened to her because I
That's
felt
good.
like she had such belief in me as a writer. And,
Yeah.
it's lonely enough being a mother and then
Yeah.
being a mother who happens to be a writer or a performer or whatever, an
Right.
artist. It can be pretty isolating. And I listened to her and I just, more than anything, it was just a lifeline for me to just chronicle the insanity,
Yeah. Yeah.
the true
Yeah.
insanity of our days, you
Yeah.
know?
And that is so true because you think you will remember it. You think,
Oh,
oh
forget
gosh,
it.
for
Yeah,
sure. But
there's no
it
way.
disappears. So that's such a great gift that you got that you were able to do that because that takes a lot of discipline to, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're like, I just want to go to bed. So
Well,
that's great that
part of it is that I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep without my husband there. I don't know why. I just would and so I would have about 2 hours and I would just sit down and, write things out. And I'm so
hmm
grateful that I did because I basically chronicled, our oldest is 26. So I've got like all of these different eras of,
hmm
what I loosely called, boobies and other bodily functions because,
Yeah.
the sheer physicality of motherhood, where
Yeah.
you're being peed on and pooped on and thrown up on and
Yeah.
all in like within a half an hour. And, and you're like, nobody ever told me that it was this, just it's so messy.
It's so many fluids. It's just really
How
too
many
many.
fluids?
All
Oh
of
my
them.
gosh. Like I said to my mother, like, why didn't you ever tell me? And she was like, I figured you'd figure it out for yourself.
That's so funny. That's so funny. So I want to hear more about how you kind of became a storyteller, how that evolved, and like what does that look like over your career? Because I'm sure you don't, I don't know. Maybe did you start out saying, I'm going to be a storyteller?
No, I started off as an actor
Uh-huh.
and I did that for a lot of years. Some not really all that financially successful, but it was really my purpose. And
hmm
then at one day I just started writing. And
Mm,
what I loved was that in those days, typewriter, and I could pull out a piece of paper and hold it. That's something that I had created, as opposed
mm,
to waiting around for somebody to cast me in something. And so I really didn't like the performing arts business at all. I
mm,
just, it was just so cutthroat. And I just decided I need to do something different. And I needed to find out something different about myself. So when we moved to Colorado in like 1995, we went to Naropa University, got an MF. I started off in another program, but ended up in the MFA Writing and Poetics program there. And, I always was a little sad I love the community of theater. I love collaboration and creating things together. And
hmm
then one day in one of my classes, it struck me, oh, I know how to create characters. I know how to
Oh,
do that from
yeah.
all those years of creating characters.
Yeah.
And so, and again, with the support of my mother-in-law, who at one point it was my mother-in-law and a dear friend who was my mother-in-law was in her 70s, our friend was in her 60s, and I was in my 50s. And we kind of did these loose little readings called The Nest. I just really started loving kind of just telling stories about being a mother because I felt like no one ever really talked about what it was like.
Mm,
We grow with this romanticized version,
yeah.
and especially if you're like a working mother, it's really, I mean, every mother works, but if you're working in addition to raising your
Yeah.
children, I loved the interplay between just telling my own stories. The other part of it is like got really active again once the kids were out of the house with Longmont Out Loud with Audrey Grace and started doing some featured storytelling with that. And it was a really healing experience for me because, between theater school and then the theater world, it can be a really toxic environment and not necessarily always the safest environment being on stage. And that's part of what I love about what you're doing is that, you're bringing women together in this really safe, hilarious space where we can laugh together and be connected in that way. And so getting back up stage at this, like we like to say, season of my life,
hmm
because I'm in my 60s now, and to be able to get up on stage and kind of defy what society expects me to be at 60, which
Right.
is invisible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And either, crocheting or I don't know what they want me to do. It's just a great sense of being connected to something bigger than myself. I just
Mm.
love it.
Yeah. That's so great. I love that you said that it just really was a healing experience for
Oh,
you because I definitely found that too. Because there was a lot of, sometimes there's shame and there's pain and there's like just, comparison and there's all this
yes.
stuff associated with motherhood and being a woman in general. And I think it is very healing to get up and just kind of name some of this stuff and say, "Hey,
Absolutely.
I'm not perfect and
Well,
I know I didn't do it quite right, but
absolutely. And you know what the thing is, I love that you say that because it's like, the what's required of us as parents is so all consuming. And
hmm
then at like, okay, well, I mean, my kids still need us. I mean, but it's different. They're young adults. They're in their world. And so I now all
right.
of a sudden can sit back and go, oh, okay. I get to kind of focus back on myself and return to my sense of self, take leaps of faith. I really believe in
hmm
taking leaps of faith in myself and getting back up on stage at this stage of my life. I love it when they say season because I feel like, anything that seasons a brisket, I'll go into that season of life. But it's like, basically being able to get up in front of people in that shared experience and just talk about what it's like as a
Yeah,
60-year-old woman, over 60-year-old woman to have to go look for a job, or what it's like to
right,
go to the
right.
doctor. Like, oh my God, going to the doctor in your 60s. It's a very like, I don't know. I feel like at least a few times a week, someone's throwing cold water in my face. Like, really? That's what you're expecting from me. It's great. So I like pushing the boundaries with that. And I feel like with the stories that I'm telling, I want to bring humor. I want them to be relatable. I want to have something a little unexpected. I like to challenge people a little bit with it.
Yeah.
And I love the shared laughter is just so joyful. Oh my
hmm
gosh, it's so joyful. And
Yeah.
we need that.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are times when I think laughter is really
Mm,
it is so healing. It brings people together and it's
it
just
does.
yeah, it allows
And
us
and for
to
women, I think it's really important. Humor, I think the history of women and humor has always been like the arrangement was always self-deprecating, right?
mm,
You had to make fun of yourself to get up on stage. But
hmm
now I'm seeing like a whole generation of women who are just saying, no, I don't need to do that. I
hmm
just, I'm funny and I can be funny without making fun of myself or making fun of other people,
Yeah.
like not at the expense of other people. And so
Yeah.
I just really love what I'm seeing out there both locally and then when I'm seeing my one of my daughters and I went to go see Michelle Buteau and oh my God, I mean talk about fierce
hmm
and powerful and hilarious. Just like
mm
I just love that. Um, whether
hmm
it's
Yeah.
whether it's short form or long form.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of interesting. Like I haven't seen like I definitely have seen how the comedy scene has changed
Oh yeah.
since I started even because I did improv comedy before this, but I didn't really start as doing stand-up comedy um since about like whatever 17 years ago.
Okay.
And so I've seen
Oh.
that change so much. Like it used to be, there was only a couple women in
Oh.
the crowd and in the group of, at the open mics. And now it really has
Yeah.
gotten to be more and more women in the scene. And I don't even feel like, I don't know, storytelling has also evolved with the things that are available nowadays. I don't know how you've seen that.
Oh,
To-
oh, definitely. I mean, and some of the people that, might have been comics like Mike Birbiglia, like I
Mhm.
think he's evolved from being a stand-up to a comic storyteller. Like
Yeah.
his one-person shows or Hannah Gadsby, their one-person shows, like those types of where you're really merging, there is a lot of humor, but in their cases, there's something about taking hard things in one's life and being able to, bring that perspective of some humor to it. The other
Right.
part of it that drives me as a storyteller is I'm a first generation American. So my father escaped Eastern Europe before World War II started. We lost a lot of family. And I think a lot about, one person, how many stories do we have in that, right? I've got
Hmm.
multitudes of stories. You've got multitudes of stories, and all the stories that didn't get told, that never
Hmm.
got told. And so
Yeah.
there's something in me, I think, just by the grace of who I was raised by, I just used to take in these stories and would beg for these stories from my father and my uncle and my aunt and whoever I could, get to tell me stories of the people that I never got to know. So
Mm.
that, that's really important to me. And then in
Hmm.
addition to like the live storytelling that I do, I also write mostly for children's literature. I'm not pre-published author, as we like to say, but I also love to write for kids and tell stories that they can relate to, characters, that situations that they can relate to as well. I just
Yeah.
think like storytelling, whether it's a joke that's a story or it's a longer form that's a story, connects us in really important ways. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For
yeah.
sure. One thing I like to always ask our guests here on the Moms Unhinged podcast, getting back to parenthood and how crazy that can be. I can't even imagine how many unhinged moments you have, but what is there one that stands out to you that you can share with us?
Oh, of course I have a million of them, but I
Yeah.
think there are two that come to mind. One that really could have been an unhinged moment, but as I mentioned, like the twins refused to wear socks. I
Yeah.
didn't really care, and going to the market with them or even going to Target was such an ordeal. Like it was half the time I used to abandon the cart, call my husband, say, "We're out of here. They're misbehaving. I can't do this. It's too stressful. It's in aisle 17 or whatever." And at King Supers, they knew us so well that they would be like, "We got the card, Lisa. You go call Jeff," right? So it was a beautiful day. It was in February. It was one of these beautiful early, late winter, early spring days. And we'd gone to Target, successfully made it through the trip. I was getting the kids back into the minivan. Everybody was happy. And I opened the windows a little bit to let some fresh air in. And all of a sudden, this woman pops up, very like nicely coiffed, woman. And she looks at me and she says, "I just want to tell you what a wonderful job you're doing with your children." And it was one of those moments I was like, "Oh my
Uh,
God, I feel seen. Oh my God,
I
I
know,
feel
right?
seen."
Just a
It was
little
little for
morsel of
like a
recognition.
moment. Oh, and then then in a split second, it was like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, her head spun around. She like spewed out green, horrible things as she stuck her head in the car and went, "But I really wish you would put socks on those children." And I sat there going like, is there like some strange sock cult that I don't know about? Um, and I'm like, "Well, just look at the floor because I've got like 20 pairs of socks that they've ripped off."
Uh-huh.
And I lived in New York before, for like a decade.
Yeah.
So like my first inclination was just to hit the button on the window and like I could just easily decapitate this woman. But I'm thinking I can't really do that in front of my children. And I look in the rear view mirror and our oldest is looking at me with her big blue eyes. And I'm like, yeah, I can't really detect it. That would not be kind of traumatizing for them. But I did like touch the window a little bit. So it went up. And I was like, "Well, thank you very much for your input." And I continued and leaving her enough room to pull her head. So that was a potentially unhinged moment. Totally. But, I think probably the most stressful thing for us were birthday parties, like, and there was one weekend we had three birthday parties in one day, one where they were going together. Then the oldest was going to one, and I was going to the other with the twins. So
Oh
my
my
husband and
gosh.
I were in the two cars. And I remember at one point we kind of went by each other on a road, and I'm about to make a right turn, and one of the twins just tosses her cookies all over. And I
Oh.
am celebrating. I'm like, "Oh my God, yes, we don't have to go to the birthday party." I call him up. I said, "Great news. They threw up." So I think so
Oh
that
my
to me
God.
is like an example of like, because yes, we could have just said we're not going to all three of the parties, but I just didn't want to listen to the screaming and like
I
yelling and the
know.
crying. And
Yeah.
so yes, I don't regret that I celebrated on my daughter throwing up all over the van, because I'm like, I'd rather clean the van from vomit than go to this birthday party. If I
I the universe works in mysterious ways, right?
and my husband was like, yes, we were both like, yes.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh, that's
So
so
that's an
funny.
example. There are so many, as
Yeah,
you know, right? I mean,
yeah,
we stockpile them,
I
you know,
know.
it's just great.
I can't even imagine the kind of scheduling and the
Oh,
driving and the shuttling kids around when they're
oh my
all
God.
like
It was
right.
so insane. You
Yeah.
know, when I did, for one of the first shows that I did with Longmont Out Loud was their escape from the holidays, which was really fun. And one of the pieces is about weaning, the art of weaning, right? And the one of the performances, it was amazing because the twins were there. My mother, who was 91 at the time, was there, you know, and my sister-in-law was there. And so we had this whole like multi-generation of all of these women. And I told this story and about, you know, what it was to be weaning three kids, especially the twins. And after the performance, two things that happened were hilarious. But they came up to me and they were like, is that really what happened? I said, yeah, that's pretty much verbatim. And I could feel how grateful they were to be able to have that reflected back to them. Like, you know, like that. And then I went into the bathroom and some woman, like, you know, whipped out her phone and showed me, you know, just basically both her boobs with a kid on it. I was like, hi, how are you? I'm like, oh my
It's a
God. But I
little
recognized, she was like, oh my God, you spoke to this experience. And I'm
yeah.
like, great, can you put your phone away? Like, great to meet you, but
Didn't expect to see boobs when I came in.
exactly. But you know, it did make me think like
Yeah.
these stories really do resonate, you
Right,
know?
right,
Yeah.
for sure. That is so crazy. And I also can't believe, just thinking about the other story about the woman. It's weird to me how
Oh,
much advice people think
oh
they
my
should be
God.
giving moms, who are just out and about in the wild trying to survive, and she's concerned
Yeah.
about your kid's socks.
Exactly.
It's
Like what?
just
Like I just like looked up on the internet. Is there a sock cult in Longmont that I don't know about? You know, like it was such a bizarre thing
yeah,
and such an invasion of personal space. But you know,
right.
definitely the advice. I mean, when I was pregnant with the twins, you know, Mila was only 18 months old. You know, and I mean, we lived in Boulder, so of course, you know, breastfeeding was everything, and
Yeah,
like everybody was saying, you have to stop, and like we weren't ready to stop. And I was just like, that's not your, just, first of
right.
all, shut up. And second of
Yeah,
all, it's not for you to tell me what to do.
right. So
And
weird.
we needed it, you know, like it would kept us connected. And
Mhm.
then when I decided that I had had enough, I realized like I needed to find a different way of comforting my children than with my breasts. You know,
Mhm.
like I just like had to move on from that stage of all of our lives, you
Right,
know?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is wild. Motherhood is so crazy. This is why we have to laugh about it, because
We
it
have to.
yeah, it's just wild.
I think it's also just trusting our own voice, knowing like
Yeah.
what's your motherhood style. And it's
Right.
also different if you have more than one kid. You're going to be a different mother for every single one of those
Yeah,
kids. You
for
know, it's
sure.
just but I think like just finding those places of community, and whether it's community, whatever it might be, that's just like I just can't get enough of it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. And I think also just really forgiving ourselves for anything. Like, I love that you said we're going to be a different mother for each child.
Yeah.
I definitely found that to be true as well. And I mean, even I just had two, so that, but
Well, just
yeah, yeah. But I think forgiving ourselves for anything that we feel like we should have done differently, or, any of this outside noise, and just allowing ourselves to be
yeah.
the mother and trust our
Well,
voices, like you said.
exactly. And I don't know about you, but like my mother was definitely a mother of a certain generation where,
Mm,
you know, they never like yeah, acknowledge that they made any mistakes. And so it was a really big thing for me to like be able to say to the girls, like, oh, mama messed up, I'm sorry, I didn't do that right, or, whatever it might be. I wouldn't beat myself up, but I would take responsibility for it so we
Right.
could just move on.
Right.
Like I just didn't want to have I didn't want that hanging over any of us. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So true. So true.
yeah.
Well, Lisa, this has
Oh,
just been so much fun. The
oh,
half hour goes so
same.
fast. I know.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
Thank you so much for your insight and all of that. And let us know where people can find you,
Oh,
connect
I
with
definitely,
you.
yeah, I have a website. It's lisatrank.com, and I post, when I'm performing. I'm working on some things, and we'll see what's going on. But yeah,
Awesome.
always up for
Great.
adventures, and
Yeah.
I just so appreciate the connection. And I
Yeah.
again thank you for everything you're doing and bringing all of these wonderful. c- I call them momics, right? They're momics.
Yeah. Right. Right. That's so
Yeah.
great.
Well,
So,
enjoy.
yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll have all those links in the show notes. And
Fabulous.
thanks again.
All right. Keep
Bye.
laughing, okay?
Yeah, keep laughing.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening, and make sure you subscribe, share, and follow us on the socials to get more comedy clips.